Niyama Coleman rubbed her lower back tiredly as she stood at the sink in the hospital break room. Her 12-hour shift was coming to an end, and the fatigue seemed to soak into every cell of her body. At 55, being a nurse was getting harder and harder, but Niyama didn't allow herself to complain, not with her financial situation. "Nurse Coleman, someone from Mr. Higgs's family is asking for you there." A young intern looked into the room. "Coming." Niyama nodded, wiping her hands with a paper towel. She glanced at her reflection in the small mirror above the sink. The wrinkles around her eyes had deepened, and her skin had lost some of its elasticity, but her dark eyes still had a lively glow. Smoothing her short, curly hair with a streak of graying, Niyama pulled on her uniform and stepped out into the hallway. She returned home after 9 in the evening. Their small house on the outskirts of Laramie looked bleak in the light of the only working street lamp. Niyama noticed the light in the window. That meant Kiara was home. Lately, her daughter had often stayed late after work at the diner, citing double shifts, but Niyama suspected it was because of a new suitor. "Kiara?" she called out as she crossed the threshold. A disgruntled, "Yes, I'm here," came from the living room. Niyama found her daughter sprawled on the shabby couch with her phone in her hands. 26-year-old Ciara was a beautiful young woman with long legs, almond-shaped eyes, and a mop of tight curls that she dyed copper-colored. "Have you had dinner?" Niyama asked, setting her bag down on the kitchen table. "I had a snack at the diner," Kiara replied indifferently, keeping her eyes on the phone. Niyama sighed. Their relationship with her daughter had long ago turned into a cold war, interspersed with occasional truces. Ciara thought she was stuck in this backwater because of her mother, who couldn't give her a proper education. Niyama saw her as a girl who didn't appreciate what she had and was always striving for something unattainable. "I've paid the electricity bill," Niyama said, pulling the leftovers from last night's dinner out of the refrigerator. "Next month it's your turn," Ciara rolled her eyes. "Still keeping money under the mattress?" "Mom, this is the 21st century. My money is my business," Niyama cut her off. "I know what I'm doing." Niyama didn't tell her daughter that she'd managed to save almost $70,000 over the past 15 years. It was rainy day money, for her retirement, and maybe for Ciara's education if she ever decided to go to college. Niyama kept most of it in a safe hidden in her bedroom. She hadn't trusted banks since she'd lost her home during the financial crisis 20 years ago. "How's work going?" Niyama asked, trying to make contact. Same old, Ciara shrugged. "Serving assholes who leave a 5% tip and groping their ass." "Ciara!" "What? That's the truth of life, Mom. You know what else is true? That I'm gonna be stuck in this dump forever, serving burgers and beer." Niyama pressed her lips together. It wasn't the first time she'd heard that song. "You can always go to community college. I'll help with the fees." "On your nurse's salary?" Ciara snorted. "And how am I going to pay for housing, food, textbooks?" "If you really wanted to study, you'd find a way," Niyama replied tiredly. "Scholarships, grants, loans, others manage somehow." Ciara defiantly returned to her phone, indicating that the conversation was over. Niyama didn't insist. She was too tired for another argument. The next morning, Niyama woke up to the sound of the front door slamming. Kiara had obviously gone to work at Earl's Diner, where she had been a waitress for almost 5 years. Niyama sighed. It was her day off, and she was hoping to spend at least some time with her daughter. An hour later, Niyama was already downtown, where she planned to pay her bills and buy groceries for the week. As she approached the post office, she noticed a tow truck parked at the entrance, and a small crowd gathered around an old blue Ford. "That's not fair, man!" exclaimed a tall young man, addressing the tow truck driver. "I'm only here for 5 minutes." "None of my business, buddy," he replied indifferently. "Rules are rules. Either pay the parking ticket or get your car out of the parking lot." Niyama wanted to walk past, but something in the young man's desperation made her stop. He was handsome with that rough male beauty that had always attracted Niyama. Broad shoulders, dark skin, shaved temples, and short dreadlocks gathered at the back of his head. "How much is the fine?" she asked in surprise. The young man turned around, and his dark eyes met her gaze. For a moment, Niyama thought there was a calculating glint in them, but it disappeared immediately, replaced by a warm smile. $75, ma'am, he replied with a slight bow. But please don't bother, it's my problem. Do you have cash? Asked the tow truck driver, losing patience. The young man waved his hands. I'm afraid I don't carry that much cash. Niyama, not knowing why, opened her purse and pulled out $80. Here, she said, handing the money to the tow truck driver. Is this enough? The driver nodded, took the money, unhooked the car, and drove off. The young man stood looking at Niyama in shock. You just saved me, he said, and his smile grew even wider. My name is Darius Pemberton, and I owe you one. Niyama Coleman. She introduced herself, feeling a strange warmth in his gaze. You're welcome. We all need a little help sometimes. Let me at least buy you a coffee, Darius offered. I need to thank my guardian angel somehow. Niyama wanted to refuse, but something in his eyes, genuine gratitude and warmth, made her agree. Just make it quick, she said. I still have a lot to do. 15 minutes later, they were sitting in a cozy coffee shop nearby. Darius was an attentive conversationalist and an excellent storyteller. He was 33 years old, recently moved to Laramie from Detroit, and was trying to start a new life. You know, Ms. Coleman, he said, looking at her over his coffee. I didn't have a chance in Detroit. Poor neighborhood, bad company. I lost my parents early and lived with my grandmother, but she couldn't keep track of me. At 16, I was already in trouble with the law. And what changed? Niyama asked, surprised at how easy it was for her to talk to this stranger. I met someone who believed in me, Darius replied with a smile. He showed me that there were other ways, taught me to use my head instead of my fists. And here I am, trying to build something worthwhile. And what do you do? Niyama didn't even realize she'd switched to you. I'm developing a small business. Darius leaned closer, his voice taking on a conspiratorial tone. You know what the most important thing in business is? Seeing opportunities where others see obstacles? Niyama smiled involuntarily. There was something infectious about his enthusiasm. And what opportunities do you see in Laramie? She asked. It's not the most prosperous city. Oh, Ms. Coleman, Darius exclaimed. That's exactly what makes it perfect. Minimal competition, low rents, hungry market. I'm in the electronic supply business from Asia. Phones, tablets, components. You can buy it all there for pennies and sell it here at a decent markup. Niyama nodded politely, but in the back of her mind she felt doubts. It all sounded too smooth. But then Darius showed her pictures of the merchandise on his phone, and the doubts began to dissipate. I started small, he continued. I brought in a dozen phones, sold them, ordered 20, and so on. Now I'm ready to scale. My supplier is offering a batch at a 50% discount, but I need a large order. How much does that cost? Niyama asked, surprised at her own interest. $65,000, Darius answered, and then added, I've already collected almost the entire amount. But don't worry, I'm not going to ask you for money. I'm just sharing my plans. Niyama felt her heart skip a beat, the exact amount of her savings. It was a strange coincidence, but Darius didn't even seem to notice her reaction, passionately talking about the prospects of his business. The profit will be at least twice the investment, he said. And if you're lucky, 3 times. And that's in just a month or 2. Niyama shuddered. The offer sounded too good to be true. But something about Darius made her believe him, perhaps his genuine enthusiasm, or the fact that he hadn't even tried to ask her for money. I have to go, she said, finishing her coffee. It was nice to meet you, Darius. Likewise, Ms. Coleman, he smiled. May I invite you to dinner? Say Friday night? Niyama wanted to decline, but instead heard her own. Yes, of course. Darius wrote down her phone number and, saying goodbye, kissed her hand with such grace that Niyama felt like a young girl. That evening, Ciara returned home earlier than usual. She looked strangely excited, her eyes sparkling and a blush playing on her cheeks. You're early today, Niyama remarked as she prepared dinner in the kitchen. Switched, Ciara replied shortly, slipping into her room. Niyama sighed. Their relationship with their daughter was becoming more strained by the day. It was as if Ciara was purposely distancing herself from her, hiding her thoughts and feelings. Meanwhile, a couple blocks away from the Coleman house, In a small motel on the edge of town, Darius Pemberton was dating a young woman. "Are you sure she'll fall for it?" Ciara asked, lying on the narrow bed and watching Darius count money. "I'm sure, baby," he smirked. "You should have seen the way she looked at me. A single woman at her age? With money? That's like taking candy from a child." Ciara frowned. "Don't forget this is my mother." "So?" Darius walked over to her and ran his hand through her hair. "Didn't you say yourself that she was hiding money that could change your life? Money that you deserve more than she does?" Ciara didn't answer. Yes, she had told Darius about her mother's savings after their third night together, told in a fit of resentment and frustration when Niama had once again refused to help her with the money to move to Denver. "We'll take that money and move out of here," Darius continued, kissing her neck. "We'll buy you nice clothes, a car. You'll live like a queen." "What about the wedding?" Ciara asked, pulling away. "You promised we'd get married." "Of course, baby." Darius smiled his most charming smile. "As soon as we get the money. A big, beautiful wedding, just the way you want it." Ciara nodded, still hesitant. She'd met Darius 3 months ago when he'd first shown up at Earl's diner. He flirted with her, left big tips, and then started waiting on her after work. Ciara fell in love quickly and wholeheartedly. Darius was everything she dreamed of, handsome, confident, with plans for the future, and he promised to take her away from this backwater. "I have to go," Ciara said, getting out of bed. "Mom's going to ask where I've been." "Go," Darius nodded. "And remember, not a word about us. A couple more weeks and we'll be free." Ciara left, and Darius leaned back on the pillows, smiling contentedly. The plan was working like clockwork. The old woman was already half in his pocket, and soon he would have access to her money. And then he would decide what to do with Ciara. He might even take her with him, for a while. The girl was hot and she was fun to be with. But the important thing was the money. $65,000 could change his life. For the next 2 weeks, Darius methodically charmed Niama. He invited her to dinners, gave her inexpensive but thoughtful gifts, called her every day to ask how she was doing. He told her stories about his difficult childhood and how hard it had been for him to start from scratch. Stories that were half truth, half fiction, but sounded so sincere that Niama couldn't help but believe. Ciara watched this strange courtship with a mixture of disgust and impatience. She saw her mother blossom, saw the blush on her cheeks, and the new dress Niama had bought especially for her date with Darius, and she waited, waiting for Darius to fulfill his part of the plan. The denouement came exactly 2 weeks after their first meeting. Darius invited Niama to dinner at Laramie's most expensive restaurant. They sat at a table in the corner, drinking wine, and Darius talked about money for the first time. "Niama," he said, taking her hand, "you know how much you mean to me. These 2 weeks have been the best 2 weeks of my life." Niama smiled, feeling her heart beat faster. Darius was the first man in years that made her feel desired. "I want to offer you something," he continued. "A business proposition. I know you have savings, and I know that banks are paying ridiculous interest on deposits right now." Niama tensed. "How do you know about my savings?" Darius didn't blink an eye. "You mentioned yourself that you're saving for retirement. And I thought, what if you invest that money in my business? Instead of it lying around dead, it could generate real profits." "Darius, Look," he squeezed her hand tighter. "I'm offering you a partnership, 50-50. You put up the money, I'll put up my knowledge and connections. In 3 months, you get your money back plus 50% of the profits. At least." Niama hesitated. The offer was tempting, but the risk seemed too great. "I don't know, Darius. It's all of my savings." "I understand," he nodded. "And I don't want to pressure you. Just think about it. What you could do with an extra $30,000 or $40,000. Maybe buy a better house? Or help Ciara with college?" The mention of a daughter hit the mark. Niama really wanted to give Ciara a chance at a better life. And if this business really did turn a profit, "Let me think about it," she said. "Of course," Darius smiled. "Take your time. But remember that the offer from my supplier is only valid until the end of the week." For 3 days, Niama was tormented by doubts. She had almost decided to back out when Darius called her with the news. "Niama, you won't believe it!" he exclaimed into the phone. "I just got confirmation from a client. He's willing to buy the whole lot at 30% above market price. That means our profits will be even higher." Darius's enthusiasm was contagious. Niyama felt her doubts dissipate. That same evening, she invited him to her house, making sure Ciara would be late for work. "I'll take it," she said, pulling a neatly tied bundle of bills out of the safe. $65,000, all I have." Darius stared at the money, his eyes glistening with greed, but he quickly pulled himself together and put on a mask of gratitude. "You won't regret it, Niyama," he said, accepting the money. "We'll do this together, and this is just the beginning." Niyama nodded, trying not to think about the fact that she had just given all her savings to a man she had known for less than a month. She believed Darius, wanted to believe. "I'll do the paperwork tomorrow," he said, tucking the money into his gym bag. "You'll get a copy of the contract and all the details of the supplier." "Okay." Niyama tried to smile, but it didn't come out very convincingly. Darius walked up to her and hugged her tightly. "Thank you for your trust. You have no idea how much it means to me." She nodded, resting her face against his shoulder. Something inside her screamed that she was making a mistake, but it was too late. The money had passed into Darius's hands, and now all she could do was hope he kept his promise. Detective Isaiah Dupree cringed as the gusty wind threw the yellow police tape in his face. It was a cold and unfriendly morning in Laramie, just like the circumstances. "What have we got, Mackenzie?" he asked the captain, desperately holding papers on a clipboard. "Male, approximately 30 to 35 years old, multiple stab wounds," the captain shouted over the howling wind. "Discovered by a maid at the Moonlight Motel around 7 this morning. Room 14 was on the first floor." Dupree methodically examined the body of a young man lying on the worn carpet in the center of the room. 8 or 9 stab wounds in the chest and abdomen. Blood spatter on the walls spoke of the force of the blows. "ID?" the detective asked, pulling on latex gloves. "Darius Pemberton, 33 years old." Sheila Reeves, the medical examiner, replied, pointing to a clear bag containing a driver's license. "Temporary address here at the motel." "Time of death?" "Between 23 hours yesterday and 2 o'clock this morning." Dupree continued to look around the room. Typical cheap room. Bed, nightstand, small TV, bathroom. On the nightstand, a few beer bottles, a condom wrapper, a cell phone. In the trash can are crumpled receipts from the steakhouse. "Did anyone talk to the receptionist?" Dupree asked. "We need to find out if the victim had any customers." "The night manager didn't see anything," the young officer replied. "But the maid who found the body said she often saw a young woman here. Black, with copper-colored dyed hair." Lou Ellen Porter, the maid, turned out to be a quiet, middle-aged woman with tired eyes. "He had lived here for about 3 months. Always polite, tipped well," she said. "And the girl who came to see him was young and beautiful. Her hair was copper, curly, often stayed overnight." "Did you hear her name?" "No, but she works at Earl's Diner. I saw her there at lunch last week. An hour later, Dupree was at Earl's Diner. I'm looking for a waitress, a young black woman with copper-red hair," he said to the manager, showing his badge. "That's Ciara Coleman. She was supposed to be here at 11, but she called in sick." "How long has she been with you?" "About 5 years. She's a good worker when she's not late. But in the last few months, she's been asking to fill in or change shifts. I think she's got a boyfriend." The manager identified Darius from a photo and said that he did come into the diner often, always sat on Ciara's station, and sometimes waited for her after her shift. After obtaining Ciara's address, Dupree went to her home. The door was opened by a middle-aged woman he immediately recognized as his mother. The same facial features, though sharper with the wrinkles of fatigue. "Mrs. Coleman?" "Detective Isaiah Dupree. I'm looking for Ciara Coleman." "My daughter's at work." The woman frowned. "No, she's not at work. The manager said she called in sick." Niyama Coleman blinked in surprise. "Strange. She left around 8 in the morning, said she had a shift." Dupree made his way into the living room and sat down in the proffered chair. "Mrs. Coleman, do you know Darius Pemberton?" Niyama flinched, and the detective noted how her hands involuntarily clenched into fists. "Yes," she answered quietly. "We dated for the last 2 weeks." When was the last time you saw him? Last night. We had dinner at the steakhouse, and then he walked me home about 10:30. Then he left. Said he had something else to do. Mrs. Coleman, I'm sorry, but Darius Pemberton is dead. He was killed last night. Niama turned pale. Her hands trembled, and she covered her mouth with the palm of her hand. No, it can't be. Who did it? We're investigating this murder, Dupree replied calmly. When was the last time you saw your daughter? Ciara? This morning, like I said. She left for work, or so she said. Did your daughter know Darius? They met a couple times, here at home. Niama frowned. Why are you asking about Kiara? We have a witness who saw a young woman who looks like your daughter in Mr. Pemberton's company. Often. No, there must be some mistake. Ciara only met Darius a couple of times when he came here. Darius Pemberton lived at the Moonlight Motel. The maid identified your daughter as a frequent visitor to his room. Niama froze. Her face became impenetrable, but something flashed in her eyes. Pain? Anger? The detective couldn't pinpoint. It wasn't true. Ciara didn't know Darius that intimately, and she's not a killer, if that's what you're implying. May I see Ciara's room? After a short hesitation, Niama agreed. In his daughter's room, Dupree found a man's shirt in the closet that Niama didn't identify, a stack of receipts from expensive restaurants and boutiques in the nightstand, and most importantly, a box of photographs under the bed. The pictures showed Ciara and Darius hugging, kissing, looking like a couple. That's him, Niama said quietly, looking at the pictures. And Kiara. Attempts to reach Ciara were unsuccessful. Dupree sent her picture to the station, with instructions to put out an APB on all transportation hubs. One last question, Mrs. Coleman. What do you know about Darius Pemberton's financial situation? He said he had a small business, importing electronics from Asia. Did he ever ask you for money? The woman looked away. Not directly. He offered me to invest in his business, talked about big profits. And you accepted? Yes. I gave him $65,000, my life savings, yesterday before dinner. Back at the station, Dupree learned that tech hacked into Darius Pemberton's cell phone. Among the contacts was a man named Lavoris Tyson, with whom the victim was in frequent contact. Lavoris was found in a small apartment across town. He was nervous when the police knocked on his door and visibly relaxed when he learned they weren't here for drugs. Darius is dead, he interjected when Dupree broke the news to him. Damn. I told him this was a bad idea. What idea? Lavoris plopped down on the couch. His plan: seduce the old woman, take her money, and take off with her daughter. Dupree listened intently, taking notes as Lavoris narrated. He had met this girl, Kiara, about 3 months ago. She told him that her mother was hiding a lot of money. Darius knew what was up. He'd done it a couple times before in Detroit. So it was Ciara's idea? No, not exactly. She just blabbed about the money. Darius came up with the plan. He's gonna woo the mom, get access to the money, then run off with the daughter, or pretend to run off with her. What do you mean? Darius wasn't going to take her with him, not for real. Lavoris grinned. He told me, "What do I need this beggar? I'll take the money and go off on my own." When was the last time you saw him? Day before yesterday. He came in here, kept bragging about the old lady's bite. Said she'd give him the money the next day, and as soon as he got it, he'd disappear. And Ciara, what about her? He was going to meet her last night at the motel. Said he was going to tell her about his plans to run away together. He'd have her wait for him somewhere the next day, and he'd take off in a different direction. Back at the station, Dupree found that the APB on Ciara Coleman had come through. She had been seen at the bus station that morning, but she never took the bus to Denver, even though she had bought a ticket. Another piece of the puzzle was added when an officer reported that Darius Pemberton's car, a blue Ford, was found abandoned near a city park. Inside, several blood-like stains were found on the passenger seat. While reviewing crime scene photos, Dupree noticed a woman's bracelet on the floor near the bed, a small one with a star-shaped pendant. Technicians found fingerprints on it, which they also found on the room's doorknob and on one of the beer bottles. Dupree went back to Niama Coleman. "Mrs. Coleman, does your daughter have a bracelet? A silver one with a small star pendant?" Niama frowned. "Yes, she does. I gave her one for her 21st birthday. Can I see it? I don't know where it is. Ciara usually wears it." Dupree nodded and decided to show her the cards. Mrs. Coleman, I've talked to some people who knew Darius Pemberton, and I've gotten a definite picture. Niama sat still, as if preparing to strike. Darius was a con man. He specialized in single women with money, and your daughter, Kiara, was his accomplice. No, Niama shook her head. Kiara wouldn't. I have a witness, Dupree interrupted her. A man who knew about Darius's plan. He was going to take your money and run, perhaps with Kiara, perhaps alone. Niama covered her face with her hands. Mrs. Coleman, Dupree continued softly, I believe you found out about this plan. Learned that Darius is deceiving you, that he's dating your daughter, that he's going to steal your money. Niama raised her head slowly. Her eyes were dry, nothing but endless fatigue in them. No, detective, I didn't know anything until today, until you came. Dupree wasn't sure if she was telling the truth. The facts pointed to a tangled triangle between mother, daughter, and the con man who had swindled them both. And now that con man was dead, one of the women was missing, and the other claimed she knew nothing. The detective looked closely at the silver ring on Niama's hand. There was a tiny scratch on it, as if from a sharp object, and something that looked like blood under his fingernails. Too many coincidences for one day. Mrs. Coleman, Dupree said, pulling out the handcuffs, I need you to come with me to the station for further questioning. Detective Isaiah Dupree sat at his desk, piled high with papers, scrutinizing the forensics reports. Niama Coleman had been in the office next door for the 3rd hour. She hadn't asked for a lawyer, had agreed to voluntarily submit DNA samples and fingerprints, but had steadfastly denied any involvement in the murder of Darius Pemberton. Anything of interest? Captain Mackenzie asked, approaching Dupree's desk with a steaming cup of coffee. Yes, quite a bit, the detective nodded, pointing to the papers spread out in front of him. We checked Pemberton's bank accounts. In the last 6 months, he withdrew about $40,000 in cash, and before that, he received a large wire transfer from Detroit. You think he's another victim? Most likely. I sent a request to my colleagues in Detroit to check for frauds with similar MOs. Dupree pulled surveillance footage out of a folder. Here's Pemberton and Niama Coleman entering the steakhouse at 7 o'clock last night, and this is them leaving at 9 o'clock. Notice the bag in Pemberton's hand. It wasn't there when they came in. The money? $65,000 that Niama gave him before dinner. But keep looking. Here they part outside the Coleman house at about 21:30. Pemberton gets in his car and drives away. Dupree turned the page, showing another picture. And here's the camera at the intersection near the Moonlight Motel, captures his car at 21:58. And look who's waiting for him at the motel entrance. The surveillance image showed a young woman standing under the motel's visor, Ciara Coleman. Okay, but that doesn't prove that the mother knew about their relationship, Mackenzie noted. Right, but look at this. Here's a camera at a stoplight a block from the motel showing this car. Dupree pointed to another printout. 2247. That's Niama Coleman's Chevy. She arrived at the motel less than an hour after Pemberton and her daughter were there. At that moment, a young officer approached the desk. Detective Dupree, we found Ciara Coleman. She's at St. Mary's Hospital. What's wrong with her? Pill overdose. They found her at the Sunset Motel on the way out of town. She's unconscious, but the doctors say it's not life-threatening. Dupree got up fast. I'm on my way. Mackenzie, keep working the techs. We need to find the knife and the clothes the killer was wearing at the time of the crime. Ciara Coleman was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to an IV. Her copper-red hair was disheveled, and her face looked drained and pale. The doctor informed Dupree that her condition was stable, and she could talk. Ciara Coleman, I'm Detective Isaiah Dupree, Laramie Police Department. I need to ask you a few questions. Darius, Ciara whispered. Did you find Darius? Darius Pemberton is dead. He was killed last night at the Moonlight Motel. Ciara closed her eyes and tears ran down her cheeks. I knew. I felt something was wrong. Ciara, were you at the motel last night? She nodded without opening her eyes. We were supposed to meet up. He promised we'd leave this morning, said he'd gotten money and bought wedding rings. Your mother's money? Yeah, I told him about it. But I didn't know he'd try to cheat on my mom. I thought he'd just ask her for a loan. Did you know that Darius was seeing your mother? Of course I did. It was part of the plan. Ciara grinned bitterly. His plan. He said it would make it easier to get the money. That Mom didn't trust anyone but herself. But if she fell in love with him, and you agreed to that? Ciara turned away. I loved him. I thought we'd start a new life together. Get out of this dump, get married, be happy. What happened last night? I waited for him outside the motel. He got there around 10, showed me the money, said it worked out. She stammered. We were together, then we had a fight. About what? I found messages on his phone. He was writing to some laborious guy saying he was going to leave me, take all the money for himself. Ciara cried again. He was using me, just like he used my mom. What happened then? We yelled at each other. I wanted to leave, but he wouldn't let me. Then I heard a knock on the door. Who was it? I don't know. Darius looked out the window and cursed. Told me to hide in the bathroom. I heard the door open. I heard them talking, but I couldn't make out the words. Then there was a loud noise, something breaking. I got scared and jumped out the bathroom window. I ran out. You didn't see who came in? Ciara shook her head. No. I was so scared, so angry at Darius. I just wanted to get out of there. Your bracelet was found in Darius's room. I must have lost it there yesterday, or before. I used to go there a lot. What can you tell me about your mother? How did she feel about Darius? She fell in love with him like a teenager, Ciara answered bitterly. I've never seen her so happy. She even bought a new dress, can you believe it? A mom who counted every penny. Dupree thanked Ciara and left the room. Mackenzie's call was waiting for him in the hallway. We got an update. Officers searching the Coleman house found a bag of clothes in the dumpster behind the house. A woman's blouse and pants, all bloody, and a knife wrapped in a rag. Preliminary analysis confirms the blood is Pemberton's. I'm going down to the station. It's time to have a serious talk with Mrs. Coleman. In the interrogation room, Niama Coleman sat upright with her hands folded on the table. She looked tired, but she held herself with dignity. Dupree sat across from her, placing a file folder in front of her. Mrs. Coleman, I just spoke to your daughter. Ciara? There was concern in Niama's voice. Did you find her? Is she okay? She's in the hospital. Attempted suicide. Niama turned pale, her hands trembling. Oh my God, I have to see her. We'll finish our conversation first, the detective said firmly. Ciara told me about her relationship with Darius Pemberton, about how they plan to use you to get the money. Niama closed her eyes, her face contorted in a grimace of pain. We found your clothes and a knife in the dumpster behind your house, Dupree continued. The clothes are covered in Darius Pemberton's blood. Your fingerprints are on the knife. It can't be, Niama whispered. Mrs. Coleman, Dupree put the surveillance footage in front of her. Here you are pulling up to the Moonlight Motel at 2247 yesterday. Darius and Ciara were already there at that time. You found out that they were together, that they were deceiving you, that they were going to run off with your money. Niama was silent, looking at the pictures. What happened in the room, Mrs. Coleman? Dupree asked softly. Did you have an argument? Did he threaten you? Or were you just unable to bear the betrayal? I want a lawyer, she said firmly. 2 hours later, the public defender assigned to Niama appeared in the interview room. After a brief conference with his client, he announced that Mrs. Coleman was ready to testify. I killed him, Niama said simply, looking directly at the detective. I found out about them by accident. Yesterday afternoon, before I gave Darius the money, I noticed a message from Ciara on his phone. He'd gone to the bathroom and his phone was on the table. The message popped up on the lock screen. Waiting for you tonight at the motel. Can't wait until we leave. Niama paused, gathering her thoughts. I didn't show that I'd noticed anything. Gave him the money, went to dinner with him. The whole time I thought about him dating my daughter behind my back. The way he looked me in the eye, swore his love, and then... She gritted her teeth. After dinner, when he walked me home, I decided to follow him. You drove to the motel? Yeah. I parked nearby, waited. I saw Ciara come in. They went into the room together. I felt so humiliated. I imagined them laughing at me, at the silly old woman who believed in the love of a young man. Then I heard shouting. They were fighting. About what? Ciara was screaming that he was using her, that he was never going to take her with him. Then I saw her run out of the room through the back door. She was crying. Niyama clenched her hands into fists so hard her knuckles turned white. I knocked on the door. Darius opened, surprised to see me. I asked him bluntly, "Are you sleeping with my daughter? Have you both been deceiving me?" He didn't deny it. On the contrary, he laughed, said I should have guessed that a man like him couldn't really be interested in an old woman like me. Niyama's voice shook with rage. I tried to walk away, but he grabbed my arm. Said I wouldn't tell anyone about it because I'd be too ashamed. And that Ciara would keep quiet too, because she wouldn't want to admit she'd slept with her mother's man for money. And then he said that he wasn't really going to take Ciara with him, that she was just entertainment like me, that tomorrow he'd leave alone with my money, and we'd both be left with nothing. And that's when you took the knife, Dupree said quietly. On the table was the dinner they had ordered. There was a knife. I grabbed it without thinking. Darius grinned, said I wouldn't dare, that I was the pathetic, aging woman he had both in bed and in business. Niyama raised her eyes to the detective. At that moment I hated him, for making me believe I could still be desirable, for lying to me, sleeping with me, taking my money, and then going to my daughter and doing the same to her. You hit him, Dupree stated. I don't remember how many times I hit him. I just remember his face, first surprised, then scared, and I'm glad he was scared. I'm glad he realized you can't play with people's feelings, their lives. Niyama fell silent, her gaze absent. I don't remember how I got to the car. I got home, took off my clothes, wrapped the knife in a rag, threw everything in the trash can, took a shower, and then I just sat in the dark and thought about how I could have been so stupid, how I couldn't see what was going on right under my nose. You weren't thinking about Ciara? I did, Niyama nodded. But at that moment I was too hurt by her betrayal. She knew he was seeing me. She knew, and she went with him anyway. There was a heavy silence in the room. Dupree stared at the woman in front of him, not a psychopathic killer, but an ordinary woman whose pride and self-respect had been trampled by a double betrayal. Mrs. Coleman, do you realize that you have just confessed to murder? Yes, Niyama nodded. But I'm not sorry. He deserved it. He used me, my body, my feelings, my money, made me feel young and desirable, and then trampled it all away. Niyama's attorney signaled that the interrogation was over. Detective Dupree nodded and stood up. Niyama Coleman, you are under arrest for the murder of Darius Pemberton. You have the right to remain silent. Later, sitting at his desk filling out his report, Dupree reflected on the case he had just solved: 3 men bound by deceit and betrayal, a con man who manipulated women's feelings for money, a young woman who dreamed of a better life and betrayed her own mother, and Niyama, an older woman who believed she could still be loved and desired, gave her body, heart, and life savings, and then learned the bitter truth. Dupree looked at the crime scene photos, the body of Darius Pemberton, the pool of blood, the open gym bag with wads of money, $65,000 accumulated over years of hard work, now stained with blood. The detective closed the case folder and signed the report. Another crime solved. Another story of passion and betrayal. Dupree couldn't help but think of Niyama Coleman, a woman who at 55 had believed in the love of a young man, given him her life savings and her body, and then found out that all along he'd been sleeping with her daughter and planning to abscond with her money. The blow to her feminine pride and self-respect was too much to bear. Pemberton's words and actions unleashed a rage in her that even this normally reserved woman could not handle. There were no winners in this story, only victims of their own weaknesses, greed, and betrayal.